Thanks for joining us here again in a series of webinars that we've had going on. Obviously, these are designed for you to take the time over this period that you do have a little bit more time, and just sit back and just really, intake different perspectives from the soccer community, both hyper-local and on a global scale. We hope you enjoyed it so far. I think we're really excited about the conversation that's about to take place here tonight. Besides being a friend, this is one of my heroes here. I could definitely say in terms of my human experience and my sporting experience, all-time Canada Caps leader, has had a fantastic career in Europe, one of the most decorated if not in Canadian history. And from our standpoint, it's a great opportunity just having a little bit of insight, into his life as a player and as a human. I think a background of a player coming from Toronto and making the jump to Europe ticks a lot of boxes, both on the men's side and also our female side here, just in terms of perspective of culture and mentality and the thought process as well. So honored here to be joined by Julian de Guzman, out here in Ottawa right now during the quarantine. Hope everything, obviously, my friend, continues to be well with you and your loved ones at this time. And it's exciting because as people as friends and people from the global soccer community, it gives us an opportunity like we don't really have usually, which is to sit back and to intake and to listen. So I'm honored to have these moments with you. And again, on behalf of the entire club, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Manny, and it's always a pleasure having the chance to speak with you and Ainsley, Amrik as well. I appreciate having me on the webinar and allowing me to share my experience based on the times I've had in Europe, national team and whatnot. But no, I'm always grateful for moments like this, especially when it's not just a typical journalist or a reporter, but you guys are all special. I know Amrik, I think we've played against each other or crossed paths growing up in my early days in Toronto playing locally. But it's always good to see that type of connection still come about. Decades later, and here we are. We get to talk about it and also educate the rest along the way. So it's great.
Yeah, Jules. First things first, thank you again, just echoing Manny's sentiments. Thank you again for doing this. For those of you already know, Julian, Manny, Amrik, we all played against each other, and it's always nice to reminisce and to see some old friendly faces. And for the record, Coach Manny, Julian is from Scarborough, Ontario, not Toronto, Ontario. So let's exit out one time for all you Brampton cats from Scarborough. In any case, let's get started on this webinar. And I think the first thing that I want to ask Jules, I grew up with Jules, Manny grew up with Jules, and we've had, we've kind of seen him grow into the man that he is. But I think it's really cool for him to explain from his perspective his journey. So let me ask you, Jules, do you recall where and when Marseille had noticed you and had shown interest in your talent? And was there anything you did on your end to start that process?
I noticed when Marseille had recognized my talent and my capabilities. That was when I was there in Marseille. But prior to that, what led to that opportunity obviously was my time playing in Toronto for North Scarborough, and I had a friend at the time, Charlie Blanco, who would capture all the footage from games and a lot of pretty much the highlights you see on YouTube these days that are made. That was all done back in the day through cameras, VHS, and then you kind of send it out to the club teams. And what happened was Marseille came about when Charlie Blanco came come across Francois Glassman, who was running the hangar, and Francois Glassman had a connection or a contact in Marseille, and they were preparing for me to go out there to train with them and to have a trial starting in Marseille, and then a week later they had another trial lined up in PSG. But before I even get to that, the year before, I had a chance to go to Europe for my second time, and that was my trip to Holland. And that was because one of my teammates I had played with in growing up in Toronto, Cesar Pena, had the opportunity to showcase himself in Holland, and he ended up signing a contract in Feyenoord with their youth team. Unfortunately wasn't able to sign, and they didn't want me, but I was noticed by a second division team at the time. But my dad made a wise decision. Obviously I would stay in Europe. My dream was to go to Europe, but my dad did not want me to commit, and then I had to come back and work on my weaknesses, and then prepare for the next opportunity, which came about in 1997, and it was in September. So I had got the call from Charlie saying that Marseille wants to see me. We just gotta get a plane ticket. So, we scrapped all our savings, and I had to borrow money from friends to get this plane ticket. And this was my third time going to Europe, and I wanted to make sure this was the last time I go to Europe and come back to Canada. So I had the chance to go to Marseille, flew in, and met with the director of the formation center, which was just outside of the city, Marseille, and it's where all the players would stay at. And then I had my first day of training the next day. Now, the first day of training, nobody really knew me. No one even knew I was coming. So they didn't even expect me to arrive at practice. They had no clue who I was. I just showed up, and I remember the manager for the under-17 team had just told me, okay, get changed, threw me in the change room, got changed in my gear, and then threw me on the field. Ended up playing with the under-17s A team, and then they have an under-17 B team. So I trained with the under-17 A team. The coach at the time was Bernard Casoni, and it was probably one of the best sessions I've ever had. Following that, then I was dropped to the under-17 B team just to train, and I trained the rest of the week with those guys. So did well, and then I guess that's when they noticed, okay, the B team, the under-17 B team coach had told the A team coach, Bernard Casoni, this guy's not bad, maybe you should look at him. So then the under-17 A team took a good look at me. They gave me a full week. I did well, and then that's when they officially made it a tryout by arranging a friendly game with their second team or the reserve team. So we had a friendly game against the Marseille reserve team. We had lost 4-3 that game, but I ended up scoring 2 goals that game. I had a really good game, and then I definitely impressed the coach, Bernard Calzoni, and then 3 weeks later, I have a contract, an academy contract in front of me to sign. So that was the first time Marseille recognized, okay, this guy has talent, and they're ready to invest in me, and that was the first foot in the door of accomplishing a small part of my dream to make Europe. So that's how that happened, and that was the goal, was not to go back to Canada, and I did it.
It's fantastic, fantastic. And I myself don't even remember those intricate details, but for you to persevere and not give up because you're put on the second team is a vital characteristic that our young players need to understand. Just because you've been selected and put on a B team or A team, or it could be so fluid, as Coach Manny says. You could be put there, but you don't have to stay there. You need to prove yourself that you would want to be on that first team. But that's fantastic. Talk about prior to that, and the process that you had to kind of endure to get to that point? Like, what did you do specifically, to get to that point? Like, what was like your basic routines at home? Did you have a schedule? Did you what talk about that, and to also talk about maybe putting in maybe some of the life experiences where you had to kind of remove yourself from certain crowds because this is what you really wanted to accomplish.
Well, growing up in Toronto, I know I had the idea of playing professionally one day, and we didn't have professional teams in our era of the 90s, and the only thing you look at is it's either you go to school or you're going to become professional, whether it's in Europe or South America. And I think it was probably crazy ideas, but I mean, people were doing it. And when I was playing in Toronto, you would see players who are on the provincial team, national team, getting their chance to go to Europe. And I mean like really good players. We came from a very, very good generation of talented players. The problem with that, though, is you see these players come home. And that was probably one of my biggest fears, where, you ask yourself, why would this guy ever come back home when he was just with Newcastle, or he was Ajax, or he was in Milan, or he was somewhere in Europe where I would want to be. And these are guys you looked up to growing up. But that's where I realized, okay, now these guys are coming home. Why are they coming home? And they're always coming home because they're homesick, they're attached to home, they're missing family, they're missing girlfriends, they're missing friends. And that's where I realized I got to make a change in my life. I cannot have these type of connections growing up in my life, as well as I cannot project that to somebody who's 6 years younger than me, which is my brother. And he was a big inspiration behind that, because I did not want to make those mistakes a lot of these guys are making, who are good enough to play pro. And I think when you create that lifestyle in Canada and you become so comfortable with it, it's very hard for you to leave that lifestyle. So we did some things where, I mean, I read stories about Pelé, Maradona, you name it. And these guys, they came from the slums. I had to create something like that for myself and my brother growing up. So I mean, we literally would go in the streets barefoot and make a soccer ball out of socks, and we would go to those extremes. Whether it's summer holidays, everyone was go hang out and party and meet friends and go to movies and all that stuff. We stayed home and we trained 3 times a day. And if we're not training, we would record that soccer Saturday on that Saturday, and we watch it every day over and over again and replay it. And this is through VHS, right? And then you'll get the Tele-Latino odd match every now and then even hanging with Manny, you catch a Copa America game on satellite. I mean, these are the things we would try to dig for. When's the next game happening? How are we going to watch this game, and what are we going to learn from this? And even if it's going to a local semi-pro game and watching, the Toronto Astros playing or something, just stuff like that. Those are things where you just kind of make the best of that situation, and then you become creative, because now you're watching that, live, and then you're watching, AC Milan against Juventus on Tele-Latino on the Sunday, and you're trying to, compare the two of them, and how do you create something that is a dream to make come true. And a lot of the stories, it goes back to these guys, they had different lives than your average friend or your average person. And that's exactly what I had to create in the household, as well as on the, on the pitch. And that was the thing that I think built the type of character I had and I was able to bring to a place like Marseille. Now we're talking Marseille. I don't think many people know Marseille in terms of the type of city, the people, the mentality that comes with it, and then the football, right? And I kind of knew about it, but I didn't know it until I went there. And thankfully, I created that type of lifestyle growing up, where life is hard. You have to become an animal, and this game is about survival, and this game's about life. And if that's what it is for me off the field and on the field, then it gives us a chance. But if you're just going to play soccer and then carry on with a normal life off the field, your chances are very slim. Or you're going to be that guy that's very good and come back home and miss home because you enjoyed that life, right? So that's the one thing I really had to be strict on for myself, as well as my brother. And I mean, we could have had an easy way out and be comfortable and in Canada we have everything. We have everything you need compared to some of these places you end up in. And Marseille was an eye opener, and going into that very hostile environment where, one, I'm a Canadian, so who is a Canadian in '97 going to a place like Marseille that has won, European championships, right? Yeah, who am I? So now I got to deal with that. You got to deal with the fact that you don't even speak French, because the only French I have is a grade 9 French. Keep in mind, I dropped out of grade 10. So I had to sacrifice that as well. And I went against my parents' word and dreams of me going to finishing school, scholarship, and then everyone's happy. But for me, that wasn't happiness. For me, that wasn't a dream. Going to Europe was the big thing. And I felt if a lot of these guys could do it, I feel I could do it too. I mean, Cashco Walker, Brad Parker, Dwayne DeRosario, those are just a few of them. That AJ Lee, guys I looked up to, I played with, played against. These are guys who actually went to Europe and had a taste of it, but ended up coming back home. That was my fear, and that was my biggest fear, and I did not want that to happen to myself. Most importantly, I did not want that to happen to my brother, who was already a talent the moment he started walking. So, and some of the messages I used to drill into his head is like, you live once, and that's the one thing I'm big on. You have one chance. You have only one chance to do it. We're not Brazilian. We're not Argentinian. We're not even African. We're Canadian. And the moment that train comes, you have to be ready. So a lot of the stuff that we prepared for ourselves is a lot of the training that is unnoticed. It's not the stuff you're doing on the day-to-day with your teammates as a team. It's the stuff you're doing away from that. What are you actually doing? And those are the things where I had to take away my brother's childhood to make sure that he was ready to cross the pond at the age of 12. I had to pull myself away from all the temptations and the fun stuff and, the cool things a teen would deal with. I had to eliminate all that and stick to the books. I was strict on school because I had to prove to my parents that, I'm responsible enough to go overseas, but as well as making sure that, I'm playing with 3 different teams and I'm watching every game. I'm not missing a live game, and even the games recorded, we're watching it over and over again. We're doing video now. We're doing our own sessions of video as well. So everything was football related, and that was the household. That was just our lives growing up, and crossing the pond to go into Europe. That's what prepared myself and my brother, but myself, to enter a hostile environment such as Marseille. Now, Marseille, at the time in the 90s, was considered one of the most dangerous cities in Europe. When I first went there, didn't really have that much knowledge about it, but living there and being able to go through those 3 years of being in Marseille and never getting homesick, I think before getting there was the years. I'm talking of at least 6 to 7 years of preparing myself for that type of life, because that's all I wanted was football. I didn't want hockey. I didn't want basketball. I don't want baseball. I don't want all the other things that we would have in North America. I just wanted football. So it had to be a very similar environment that my brother and I were waking up to, going to sleep to. We eat soccer, sleep soccer, and that was it, man. And I think a lot of that stuff that my brother and I went through, it's very hard today to go through that, because I think when it comes to today's generation, social media, you have access to too many things. Before, we didn't have access to so many things. You had to dig deep to get a soccer game. You had to dig deep to find a pickup game around the corner. You had to dig deep to, just find grass and to play on and don't get kicked off of. Right now, you got fields everywhere and you got teams, and I think that was the hunger in us, that we realized this is a sport where you eliminate the choices and you only have one choice, and it's football. If you have too many choices, I think in our lifetimes, you're going to make the easiest choice, which is the most comfortable. But soccer was our only choice, and that's the one thing that we made sure of in our household. That was the only thing we preached. That was the first and foremost thing that we would look up to and believe in, and that's what carried us through the years of growing up in Toronto, and then getting the chance to go to Europe, and then everything else follows.
It's so great to hear, and get some insight from you on the other side. Like, I personally, look back at our times, going to, downtown college to go to bars, just to watch, live matches, and, coming up with metric systems of who scored the most goals on our team, assists, things of that nature, and here we are, 30 years later, and now, teams are starting to take metrics and measurements on. So, it's good to see that, just that passion and that pathway was, was always on the right footing, and universal laws hold true, and it's incredible. One of the things that stuck out to me in what you were just saying, Jules, is that, just the level of communication and technology that we have these days. If I have a player, that's on trial, or have a player that's off in university, basically 5 minutes after his training session is done, I'm able to, see how it went, how the trial went, able to talk to this person, get some feedback. I just want you to take us almost to that moment when you were getting, Marseille over the line in terms of that academy, contract. What was the support network at that time? Like, did you have your parents there? Were you there with, somebody that you can, talk to, feed off of over the course of 3 weeks? I almost try to plug myself back to that time. We're all pretty much the same age, and I don't remember cell phones, and how do you get that across, the information, right?
Yeah,
how were those moments for you?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I was just overwhelmed and excited just to be in Europe. I just wanted to live and breathe European football. So just being there, I was just in a high. But at the same time, I think when you have a family behind you, and that's the one thing about me. I prepared myself to leave my family one day for a very, very long time, and just being able to update. It would be a postcard, and you just give them an update on how everything went, that week, and then that postcard will take a week to get there, and then they're getting a last week's update, but they don't know what's going on in the current time, right? So and then you just get a phone card. I remember getting the phone cards at the shops, and calling home, but for them to call me back on a payphone. So first, the payphone has to be available, right? And you're hopping in this booth, making the call and telling them, yeah, call me back at this number, da 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 da, and that's the number. And then you wait for the phone to ring, and it rings, and it's your mom on the phone. So that was the other means of communication. That was it. So you really, in those days, you really had to have like the thick skin. You had to be prepared for all kinds of obstacles and all kinds of challenges to come your way. And even though it wasn't the easiest or the prettiest, I'm not going to tell my parents that, hey, mom, the place just got robbed, and there's no electricity, and I'm sharing a bed with a player that I don't know, and like I could not even relay that type of message to my family to put them in worry. So I made everything very, very kosher and just easy and smooth. It's like, everything's great here, weather's great, I'm playing soccer, I'll know more whenever. So that was my way of going about it. I didn't want to give them too many details until, and you know what, my family has actually never, I was only beyond on that trial. I was the only person out there at the time. I know Francois Glassman was in touch with the gentleman who was taking care of the center for the players, and that was pretty much it. And then my French was okay. They spoke no English, so it was a lot of broken English, broken French going on back and forth. Half the time, who knows what someone said. There wasn't any iTranslation or Google Translation going on, so you just have to use your wits, man. And that's the one thing I think. Just being culturally sound and entering an environment like that and being able to adapt and just play a role and try to become French was one of the challenges I felt, because most people will come back from home and say, I hate that country, I don't like the language, I don't like the people, and they're just against everything. And I think that's where I was able to adapt from a very young age and pass that message on to my brother, say, hey, if you ever go to another country, just you got to become these guys right away. And for Jono, I think it helped him because he had a Dutch dictionary and he loved the Dutch culture from, you well ahead before he even traveled at the age of 12. But that was one of the things where you have to prepare yourself well in advance, because it's another world over there. And you're literally dealing with animals when you go into those training sessions. They're not going to like who you are. You're not going to get the ball. They're going to play pranks on you as a trialist. They're going to make it very uncomfortable for you, because you're a Canadian going into their grounds to take one of their guys' spots. So you're not a Brazilian doing it. You're not a player coming from these countries like Argentina or Africa doing it. You're a Canadian going into these environments, and you're dealing with now guys who are national team players for France under 17, or you have guys who are playing for New Guinea, a national team under 17 as well. Who are you competing with? Me, I was cut from the national team at the time, so I wasn't even playing for the national team as a Canadian. So believe me, I was mocked all kinds of ways, but good thing. That's a good thing, and I guess in the early stages where you don't understand what they're saying, because it definitely would get to you. But you could catch on to that, especially on the field, when you see a lot of the behaviors, and that's where it becomes survival of the fittest. And that's what actually turned me into an animal, where I'm going to do whatever it takes to get the ball. I'm going to put in a tackle and a guy, and I'm going to make myself be known in any play or moment that comes my way, because you may only get a handful of those moments and just maybe a proper training session, 11v11 game. What are you going to do? It could be a strong tackle. It could be something. But the most important thing, too, is also the attitude. Being put down to the under 17B team, you couldn't for a moment drop your shoulders, drop your head. You couldn't for a moment show an inch of negative attitude. So that's where I had to find myself and bring myself even bigger and better in a moment like that, to just so I know someone's going to say something about me at some point, which eventually did. But those are the moments where you have to really be, you have to have some humility and just know, and also confidence, and know that you are the best. You may not have to say it, but you are the best. You tell yourself you're the best, and you're going to give it your best. And as long, that's the one thing you have to promise yourself at any moment like that, is being able to give it your best. And thankfully it happened. Obviously a little bit of luck comes to play, but the luck that comes to play definitely has a lot to do with the amount of hard work that you've invested in, sacrifices, and those are the challenges that you'll come across as a foreigner, going to one of the most successful countries in the world, to one of the most successful clubs in the country, and I think being able to face those challenges at a very young age, coming from a country, Canada, where I was cut from the national team, even cut from the provincial team, and still found a way to earn my stripes at the Olympique de Marseille for the youth team. So that's how these things come to play. But I think that's what a lot of it had to deal with, the character that I was able to build over the years in Toronto, and coming over to the tryout and dealing with the egos, and it worked out.
That's awesome, Jules. I got to chime in here. I am the only one out of the four of us that didn't actually play for North Scarborough. So when we were growing up, I do remember playing against you guys. I was a West End guy until that age group change that we happened just before we went into high school. I go over to Vaughan, like you said, you mentioned Cesar Pena earlier too, played with him at Vaughan, and then he switched to you guys as well. And I remember, coming in playing at Clare Lee, we played Scarborough Flyers, and there's a center midfielder that's all over the field, and that was my biggest fear, I guess, when we played. And then all of a sudden I hear, Julian's now gone to France. I'm like, okay, great. Now I can deal with Ainsley, no problem. Manny, no problem. Julian that I had to worry about when I was in net. So I get you talked a bit about the initial kind of like challenges of cultural differences, and them not knowing English as well, your French not being so great, so you got to kind of do a lot of that to battle it. But I remember we were in grade 9 or grade 10 when you had just left. So at such a young age and at a vulnerable age, moving from Toronto to France, you gave a bit of insight into it. But I guess, what was your biggest challenge you faced, maybe mentally, as an anxiety of something of not knowing the unknown? I know you were talking about you got dropped to the B, you worked your way through it, but a bit more of a mental block or anything like that you might have had to get over at such a young age, if you want to kind of expand on that for us.
My biggest fear was reliving the experiences a lot of the guys have experienced who went overseas and then came back. And you would hear, guys would cry, or guys would lock themselves in the room, or they just become super homesick, and they drop everything, and they just come back home. Like, that was my biggest fear, and I was waiting for that to happen. I was like, it's gonna happen. Like, it has to happen at some point. But I think in terms of my approach to going into Marseille, I just told myself I felt like I was free. And that's how I kind of played it in my head. I felt like being in Canada, I'm trapped. Being in Canada, you're in prison, and you want to break the chains. And being able to go to Europe was probably, like, for me, the promised land. So that's how I kind of painted that picture for myself and my brother. We need to get to the promised land. How are we gonna get there? So going into Marseille, and I think the other fears would have been just not doing well. And every training session, I had a diary, and I would keep tabs on what I did not do right. And I would always go hard on the things I didn't do right, and I would give myself ratings. And that's what I learned by reading the papers in France. You're seeing the ratings from every game. I've never seen that before growing up in Canada. No one rates anyone in Canada. They're scared to, and if you do, you might hurt their feelings, right? There, you're seeing it right away, and that's what you're getting as a player from the coach from the young age. The coaches are rating you right away, and so I had to do that from myself just in training. And then you're dealing now with the other fear, I would say, is like the competition. So I've walked into an environment where you're in a squad of 23 players, and your job is to make the starting team. You're a foreign player. This is what they've told me. You are an international player. You have to be a difference maker. Growing up in Canada, I was more of a striker. I had the freedom to score goals and do all these things. You go into France, there were guys coming from like Africa coming in, and these guys at the time, I mean, they weren't even 16 at the time. On their passport may have said that. You could just tell there's no way they're that age. But the qualities that these guys had, there's no way I could be a striker. So the best thing that ever happened to me was the coach says, your job is to follow one of the first team players. That's your homework. And it turned out to be, at the time, Claude Makelele, who was the first team player at the Olympique de Marseille. So I had the honor to follow him at the training sessions, at the games, and that was my role on the field as a 16-year-old. And that was when I was first time ever converted to more of a deep midfielder. And he was like the same height as me, and I said, wow, this makes sense, because growing up in Canada, you're not considered a soccer player in the 90s, you're not considered a soccer player if you're under 5'7". You're too small. So we grew up in a generation where you had to be big, strong, fast, and 6 foot plus, right? I wasn't any of that at the time, but being able to be in that environment at Marseille where someone's telling you to watch a first team player like Claude Makelele, I mean, you're going to watch him, and a lot of the things that come with it over the years now, year one, year two, you can see a difference in my mindset. You can see a difference in my approach. So that was my fear, is now I got to be able to live up to this guy's style of play, compete on a day-to-day, and perform when I do play. And I think day-to-day was the anxiety I had on a day-to-day, being able to make sure I did well in practice, the pressure I put on myself. That was probably the biggest stresses I had. I didn't have any stresses of missing home. I didn't have any stresses of worrying about what's going on at home. I didn't, to be honest, it's sad to say, but I didn't care. The biggest thing that mattered to me was making it pro, or just make it in Europe, just to pave that way for a guy like my brother, because I know his eyes are on me. He wants to hear my stories, and anytime I'm on the phone with him, I got to make sure that I tell him something he could pick out of there and apply to what he's doing back in Toronto. And then my other fear is making sure that he doesn't fall out, because I was always there with him growing up in Toronto. The moment I left, I'm no longer with him. So now he's involved with his friends, he's involved with a different crew, and who knows what training he's doing. He's not in the same program, and it's not like my dad's going to follow everything I'm doing. So that was the other biggest fear I had, was making sure I was able to gain enough knowledge in Europe or Marseille, pass it on to my brother, and he's able to pick up on those things, because I pretty much did everything for him, did the video for him. I used to fold his clothes and prepare his bag for every training session and game as well. So I did everything for this kid, and I wasn't there for him. So that was my biggest fear, making sure that he's able to stay in tune and then follow my lead.
Oh, Jonathan, it's so, I mean, for us and for me to hear you talk about this, and it's almost like we're reminiscing. For those of you guys don't know, or some of you guys do know, that I grew up with Jules and Jonathan and Manny, and when I hear you speak, I always remember our conversations, but then the Jonathan factor. Jonathan was 6-7 years younger than us, and then we would go training, and this little annoying little kid would be running right next to us and playing, and then remembering you doing those exact same things where you're packing his bags, and then you're telling us, in our 2v2 games, yo, Ains, yo, man, yo, don't back up, huh? Yo, hit him hard, huh? Hit him hard. And then we have Victor Opong and Dominic Opong going 2 cleaters up on poor little Jonathan, and you're yelling at us, yo, don't back up. Yeah, John, see, you gotta play faster. That brings back some real fond memories. So just before we continue to the next series, tell me, you spent 3 years in Marseille, and so from Marseille, there was obviously after a while they came to the conclusion that you were someone that they didn't see you playing for the first team. So talk a little bit about that, how that felt, that rejection, because despite you having been rejected from the provincial team and the national team, at that level, to be rejected far from home, no support, for our kids now to go through that would kill them. Mm-hmm. So talk a little bit about that process, what happened, maybe share a little insight as to how they went about, cutting you essentially, and then how you ended up in Germany.
I have always had that mindset of always preparing yourself for the worst, and hoping for the best. So I've always, I would know whether it's an injury or you getting cut or something, you have to have your something, a backup plan. And my backup plan pretty much was, if I was ever get cut my year 1 or year 2 at Marseille, I'm in Europe. I'm not coming home. That was my backup plan. I had to have that my feet on European soils to be playing football. That was the first step. As long as I'm in Europe, that's the first step. And then after that, anywhere I end up, there's you meet people, you meet agents, and people will find opportunities, which is what happened. Year 3, at the end of year 3. So year 1 and year 2, I was with the under 17. Year 2, under 17s, but sometimes with the first team. The reserve team. And then year 3, I was a full-time reserve team player. But by year 2, you would know if this player has a chance to make that jump to the first team. And I was kind of on the, I would say I wasn't in that top 5 players in terms of this guy has a first team chance, but the coach had so much trust in me. And it was the same guy who recruited me. He was there for year 1, year 2. Then he got the call up to coach the second team, and then that's how I ended up in year 3 with the second team. But halfway through the second team, he gets called up to the first team. So then new coach comes in, and obviously things change. And the coach was Jose Anigo, who was actually first team coach for Marseille for a little while. But going to year 3, I remember just seeing a guy like Seydou Keita. So he was one of the guys I played with, and they said, this is the guy that we want to be a pro player. And believe me, he was years ahead of me in terms of quality of football, and he just knew he was going to become something special. So he was probably the only player that people were focused on, and then there's maybe another player. But the chances of making an academy and making that first team from that same club, I mean, we're talking there's probably one out of every age group that has that chance. Now, do they make it? Who knows what happens after that. But so I knew my chances were slim, and the sit down with the academy director, George Prost, when we were having our exit meetings, he pretty much said, soccer is not for Canadians. It's best you go back home. And I just thanked him for everything. I remember that meeting, and then I had to call up with the national team for a camp in Duisburg. So there was it was for the preparation group of under 20 World Cup qualifiers. So we had a camp in Duisburg under Paul James, and so right after that, I went to the camp, and then we had a couple of friendly games against some of the regional German teams, and then that's where I was scouted by FC Saarbrücken. So there was a scout there, and it was the actual second team coach for Saarbrücken, and pulled me aside and said, "Yeah, we would like to fly you in." I'm like, "Wow, this is fantastic!" So this is the first time now someone's approached me and said, "We want you," and they're gonna fly you in. So right then and there, I said, "Okay, I'm signing anything by tomorrow." If you look back at how it was at Marseille, we had to kind of create something and force my way into the door, right? And it made it uncomfortable, not just for myself, but everyone else. Like, who's this guy? There's too many questions. Like, who's this guy? This time now, I'm being recruited, and this is probably the first time this has happened. I actually got the ticket. They flew me in for a couple of days, showed me the city, and I didn't even care. I just wanted to sign the contract. They gave me my own place, and I was on a reserve team contract. So they took care of me, gave me a car. I got my first car as well. So I said, okay, I'm finally appreciated. So this gave me a different type of breath of air, you know. I needed a new scenery. I needed a new beginning and a new start. But as long as I'm in Europe, that's all that matters. I need to be in Europe. So around the same time that happens, me going to Germany, and I remember my mom was freaking out. Like, my mom was freaking out because of Germany, and you should be going to Germany. It's not for you, this and that. And I'm like, Mom, don't worry about it. Like, I'm going. It's football. That's all that matters. Same year that happens, my brother now gets a chance to go train in Holland. And it was probably another one of his sessions, because he actually came to visit me in France and Marseille and trained with the under-13s when he was 10, and they wanted him right away. But I obviously said, no, this is not where you want to be. You need to be in a better environment for your development. So Holland came about. He went to Holland, trained there, and he ended up signing. So my mom had now not just lost me in 97, is losing my brother in 2000 as well, at the age of 12. So, and for me and him, this was a dream come true. This is exactly what we wanted. I mean, not for every parent that could accept such a thing, but for me to now get closer to that step now of becoming professional, this is now my 4th year in Europe, and I'm just with the second team of FC Saarbrücken. And I had my chance to go there, and I did a full season there. And towards the end of that season, I get called to the first team to sit on the bench. And there was 3 games left in the season for the second division Bundesliga team, and I made my professional debut. And then end of that season, I was offered a professional contract. So going into season 2 now, that's when I had my first professional season as a player in the year 2000. 2000 now as well. No, sorry, 2001 season. That's when I also played for the under-20 World Cup national team in Argentina. So I just came back from preseason I missed half of preseason for my first year with Saarbrücken, and sorry, this is 2001. And then I went to camp and played 4 games with the first team. We lose all 4 games, and coach gets fired. Actually, staff gets fired, and new coach comes in, and then I don't play for almost 6 months. So how do you deal with that now as a player? You know, again, this comes back to now testing your ego, testing your character. And this is where you don't drop the shoulders or you don't show any negativity. And I pushed myself in training, but I also went back to the second team coach and said, listen, I'm more than happy to come back and help your team and play games. I just need to play games. So I was happy with that. I was happy playing games, and I did well. That coach ended up getting fired, and then the third coach for that season comes in to fight for relegation, Tom Dooley, American-German coach, former American player, and he now gives all the young players a chance to just prove themselves. So there's probably now, you're in the last quarter of the season. I got a chance to play almost every game, did well, team gets relegated, and when the team gets relegated, your contract is void, so you become a free agent. So what happens is the team, one of the teams we played against towards the end of the season was promoted to the Bundesliga, and the head scout for that team was my assistant coach for that same season, and he was in love with me. Wolfgang Geiger was his name, and then he goes back to Hannover 96 head coach Ralf Rangnick and says, "This is a young guy you want to take a look at." So I'm a free agent. Team gets relegated, and I get a call from my agent, and my agent tells me, "Yeah, Hannover 96 want to give you a professional contract in the Bundesliga." And this was in 2001. So 2001. No, 2002. Sorry, going to 2002. So by 21 now, I'm signing a Bundesliga contract. And I'm going to Bundesliga. With Hannover 96, I signed a 3-year deal with them, and I tell you, it seemed like it happened so fast, but I was very patient with it, and I was willing to take all the setbacks that come with it, and that's where you're tested most. It's never an easy story. It's never fun things that happen along the way of becoming pro and playing the game. You go. I went through so many things where I've been tested, and I've seen guys my age alongside with me. I won't mention names because they're also Canadian, where they had a reason to voice themselves, and when anytime they face adversity, they would go about the wrong way. I learned in France where if you don't learn the culture, or you don't become a part of the culture very fast, it's gonna be very hard for you. So I went to Germany, and that's exactly what I did. I learned that right away. I learned the language, I learned the history, everything you name it, and you speak to everyone on that field in their language or in their country, right? Even though they can speak English, they want to hear you show your appreciation of being there by speaking the language, by speaking their football. And that's the one thing I learned from the time I was in France. I didn't adapt fast enough, and that's why it was very, very hard for me in the first couple of years. But going to Germany, I learned that right away, and then even when times were hard for me, I mean, you become a part of the culture too, and I think that helps anybody by all means to go through those hard moments is when you're making that become your home.
Fantastic. And again, hearing you speak again reminds me of that process and remembering. Maybe the next series I'll show you guys, but remembering the letters. So back in the day, there was no email, so we'd write letters to each other. And I remember you sent me a postcard of what was going on, and remembering that transition from Marseille to Germany.
Yeah.
Which is invaluable, especially for our younger players to hear this, because our younger players in Ontario, they see Toronto FC, they see Vancouver Whitecaps, they see Montreal Impact, they see the MLS, but the dream is Europe. But for some of our young players, when they get to Europe, like you say, it's too overwhelming, and they can't understand that. So we're just gonna kind of wrap this up, but the last thought or the question I have for you is as you mentioned, the whole being patient. It sounds like to me that you were very calculated in your decisions. You're very thoughtful. It wasn't an impulsive decision. It was everything. They wanted me, okay, I'll think about it. I'll go, whatever. That's great. But what advice could you give to our AI players, but more importantly, our players in Ontario in general? You talked about doing the things that are unnoticed, that people aren't seeing. You talk about the sacrifices that you've made, I know in previous conversations, you also allude to the suffering. So you kind of created that suffering, that sufferation, as we would say in Trinidad. What advice could you give to our youth players who are aspiring to be professional players in Europe, in North America? What could you tell them? What's your advice to them?
Oh man, I mean, I think I mean, in a nutshell, the love for the game has to hurt. You know what I mean? It has to hurt. It's painful. It's painful, but you love it so much, no matter what, you know, it's gonna get you through it. In this game for me, like it has to be. It's a religion. This game for me, and that's how I made it. That's how my brother made it. It's our everything. You could ask me anything about this game, and there's a very, very good chance I could come back to you with the right answer, right? And whether it's player stats, you name it. Like I could tell you about every World Cup. I could tell you about, like, and there's no reason for kids today not to know, you know, who played in the 1974, 70 World Cup, 70. Like these should know the history of this game. If you could dig that deep and talk about. And today's football is great. I mean, today's football is fantastic. It's great. But the history of this game, those are the things, like I knew stuff that I knew I wasn't around for, you know, and that's how deep I was able to dig before I was even old enough to get my driver license.
Oh yeah, so tell us how many World Cups has Brazil won?
how many were? Is it a 5?
I think it's 5. Yeah. Sorry.
5, right?
Yeah. Sorry.
5. No, but what I'm saying is, and I'll tell you right now, I'll tell you right now, the things like I used to have this encyclopedia of soccer, and I this thing every day. So like you can't, for every kid out there that wants to be pro, it's an easy thing to say. It's an easy thing to watch on TV, but it's the hardest thing to do. Why? Because you cannot do the exact same thing your buddy is doing. You cannot train as many times as your friend is doing. You cannot train as many times as you see on TV, right? It's the things that you do that's unnoticed. So I mean, the one thing about my game that got me through my career was my stamina. And I used to run, and I used to just run. And it's great for meditation. It's great. It's therapeutic, but also it prepared my lungs to run for and cover ground for some of the greatest players in the world, and being able to play in the greatest leagues in the world. And the amount of running, and I knew running was a big thing for me because that's all you could do in winter. You couldn't go out in the snow and play soccer, right? And I think that's why Canadians, as soccer players, the ones who make it, we're known as hard workers and hard runners because we could just run. So that's a Canadian thing that should be a norm for any Canadian that wants to be pro. They should be able to run, right? That's a Canadian thing. So in the winters, even though there's snow outside, that's not stopping me, because if players could go out there in their bare feet and play on the grounds and play kick around and become pro, why should snow stop me? So those are the things that, and they have to always be the odd, strange, weird things that a normal kid wouldn't, or their parents wouldn't even let their kid go out and do, right? So doing stuff like that, going for runs. And then, I mean, you brought it up, like playing, you remember Jonathan playing years up, and I would have a go at, you know, the guys my age to make sure they go into him hard. You know, I know there's times you try that today and someone's going to call the police, right? But on your own time, you got to find a way to get around that, you know. And, you know, we played for multiple teams. I didn't just play for one team. I played for, 3 teams. I played in the Spanish league. I played in the OISL at the time, and I played in the men's league, you know. So I was playing all the time, playing, and just playing for maybe one team and relying on a coach to tell you what to do and get through it. That's not enough. Watching highlight videos of Neymar and Messi doing tricks and stuff like that, that's not going to make it, you know. Or just watching TFC games and being able to shake hands with Josie Altidore and Michael Bradley, that's not going to make it. You know, there's more to it than just that. There's a lot more to it than that, and it has to hurt. It has to hurt. So pushing your limits, pushing yourself as hard as you can, where if there's snow outside, there shouldn't be an excuse why you shouldn't go outside. If you can go outside and run in that snow, believe me, you'll find a way. There's always a way. It's always trying to do what the impossible is, right? So those are the things I had to encounter growing up as a child, and I always did the extra. I had a weight set in my basement because I would do weights, and then I would go for runs again, and then after my run, guess what I'm doing? I'm going to practice with my club team. So then after my club team, I'm going home, doing my homework, and then wake up the next day and then go for another run before I go to school. Like, those are things that you have to do because we have so much time in our hands. The phone's in everyone's hands, and they're watching movies, and I didn't do all that stuff. I didn't have girlfriends. I didn't have, if I had friends sleeping over my house, guess what we're doing? We're playing soccer, But I've always said, you have to do more than what your average is. And it's the same thing I preach to my brother. Don't be me, be better. Don't be the next Ronaldo, be better. Don't be the next Messi, be better. But at the same time, make sure it hurts, because if it doesn't hurt, then it's not real. So it has to hurt. And in a weird way to say it, the more pain there is, the more alive you feel. It becomes a real thing, and before you know it, you're in a country where they don't speak your language, man. And all those things that you've been doing, it's crazy. It just replays in your head. Why am I here? Why am I running up against Ronaldinho? Like, there's a reason why I'm here. It's because all of those hours of work I put into this, hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. Times when your friends, hey, let's go to the movies, or let's go to this party, or let's do this. When you're saying no because you got to go for a run. You got to put your 1 hour run session in, because you know that you're dying to play, in the EPL or in the Liga or something. That's the only way to make it. And don't forget, you're a Canadian. So, so there's a lot of factors that a lot of Canadians that talk about making pro, and I think a big thing too is the parents. I think the parents play a major role in today's generation. They have to make it as real and hard for the child to understand, but at the same time, they also can't be coaches, right? They have to trust the coaches as well to do the job. I think today's day and age, the coaching is much better than it used to be back then. We actually have guys who've played the game, who've been around the game, ex-players as well who are coaches, right? Which I think is great. So having that balance as a child, and you're going to hear what your coach is going to tell you, but you're also going to hear what your parents are going to tell you, right? And the one thing I was very good at doing, especially my brother, I didn't overpraise him. I didn't always tell him he was the best. I never told him that great job. I always pointed out the top 3 things or I asked him what he didn't do well at, and I also pointed out the things that he needs to work on. And guess what we did? We'd pop in the tape from last week, Juventus in Milan, and we're watching. We're watching that game, and we're trying to replay the moments that he did in that particular game. And this is on TLN we're watching. And then you get the Mexican League too that we would watch, and just playing things over and over again. So doing your homework like that, those are the things. If you're not involved with soccer, whether it's TV or playing or talking about it, then you're doing the wrong thing. That's my message right there, man.
It's it's really so insightful, and we're in the middle of this, and I'm already sort of just reflecting on this conversation. Is I think for you the topics and just to talk about your early life, for most of us in this day and age, it's a lot of stories that'll create anxiety. It's a lot of stories that will create hardship. It's a lot of stories that would create uncomfort. And I think one of the things that stand out to me is that you're just a real guy to the game. And I think that's just one of the key ingredients. And it's funny, just how romantic you make things that may not be the most positive things, positive, and impactful and beautiful in such a way that, where you say you're just free, but at the same time you're in a situation that, is a heavy grind, and it's funny. I was just talking to my son earlier about that, who, is starting his career off as a young pro, and, we were just talking about, that grind, and these days when, you hear that word, it's like, such a pretty word, and it's such a, such a word that, people type about it and, sort of say, hey, look at what I'm doing. It's so beautiful. But, that place is not a place of comfort or beauty. It's a really, it's a really tough place, and it's a place that your mind state is just, constantly like, I just got to get through this moment. I got to get through this moment. I got to get through this moment. But, once you sort of grab traction towards that, like I told him, it's a really beautiful place, and it's a unique place, and just to hear, that story with your early years. And we've been fortunate, to break this down into 4 segments, as just, just taking in this information, just, your first years in Europe, and we're talking about a 3-year span. It's, I just feel like it's a crash course, to any real player, that wants to make it out there, just in terms of just, the engagement, the passion, the true grind, when you say, there's no plan B. And, it resonates for me. You could tell, just the way you describe moments, and just your attitude, more importantly, towards it, So for us, it's a crash course just to talk about, this early portion, when we talk about you, and just to put things into perspective, this is, Canadian royalty, right? When you talk about, the soccer players that have made it here, we always say the players that have made it, are that 1%, well, it just really put it into perspective, for our younger players, you're talking to a 1% of the 1%ers, just in terms of, just the decorated career. And I'm just, so excited to get insight on, just the other portions of it. We'll be talking about your early years with Canada, and, consolidating yourself as a pro in Europe, your latter years with Canada as well, which, coincided with a golden generation, for Canada, as well, with your return to North America as well, as a grown man. And, your cycle into management, your cycle into veteran, soccer, closing out your career. And, as now, it's, as I always, tell you, it's impossible for you not to engage in the future of Canadian soccer. It's, it's necessary, and, it's great, and it's been insightful to hear, and we look forward to, to hearing, what your insight is towards that. So it's been an incredible catch up so far, Jules. I could tell you, when you even, put into the parallels of your development constantly, within your brother, like as a part of it constantly, it's just mind blowing that, there's a whole nother side to this. When you talk about someone like Julian de Guzman, your story alone is, worth 4 parts of every second of it. And, if you add, Julian de Guzman, it's really something that, for this day and age where we live in, where, players are so intertwined cosmetically to, you have to be a part of, this league or this pathway or this avenue. I think when you talk about a guy that's ready to grind, taking back to your time in Ontario, it wasn't a problem for you to play on the B and C team just to get an extra game and an extra minute. Now in this day and age, it would be pretty difficult with some of our top players to ask them to play for a B team, but it's something to, that's a great reference to some of our guys out here, and from that standpoint, it's something that I really hope that everybody takes in. Your words, I feel, I had the opportunity to speak with Pep Linders when he was the assistant coach at Liverpool, and when he was a technical director at Porto, and I came back to my guys here, and I said, I felt like in 45 minutes I went through a crash course of a Canadian soccer, diploma, in 45 minutes, and I feel very much the same way. This has been a very insightful opportunity for our guys and girls, just to really get the insides and the outs of making it, and we thank you for joining us, and we look forward to the next 3 parts of this.
Yeah. No, thank you. I'm very, very, very happy to have this opportunity. I'm definitely looking forward to the next segments, and this has been huge blessing to get to this point in our lives. Everything we've gone through and done for the game, I'm glad you guys continue to put in the positive work with the academy, and I love what you guys are doing over there, who knows, maybe I'll be working alongside next to you guys, but that's always been my dream, is to definitely help the future of the game in this country.
Absolutely. Look forward to catching up again, my friend.
All right, man.